you so much for giving me an opportunity to interview you. I'm so excited.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that today's conversation will just be more of a conversational interview where, we'll go back and forth. But as we get started, I'm hoping that you could dive into your story.
So I struggle with addiction, and I would say, I'm a recovering addict, and I always had an addictive personality. It wasn't until later that I found that would be drugs and alcohol.
Okay, so just a question out of curiosity, like how did you know that you always had an addictive personality? How did it show up prior to the drugs and alcohol?
I would always have one too many.
Okay.
Everything. Or I would take it to the extreme side of it.
Yeah.
And my first addiction was having an eating disorder.
Okay.
And that's where my addictive tendencies really started, is having my eating disorder and having that, I guess, control and escape.
Yeah.
So that's essentially how I realized. I was like, okay, this could be an issue later on. Which it was.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like it almost sounds to me like really our idea of addiction is kind of geared towards drugs and alcohol, but really technically that could be anything, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to just be this one image of what an addict is or what an addiction is or what you're addicted to. And it's interesting that you're saying that, the eating disorder is something that, you noticed. And I wonder too, like, how old were you around that time? And like, did you have the language to understand like addiction? And do you know what I mean? Like, where were you at developmentally, I guess, in terms of that language?
Yeah, so I was around 15 when I started with my eating disorder. But with the drugs and alcohol, it was at that time where, you're in high school and you're trying to be like the cool cats and,
yes.
Go to parties and different things like that. And that's where I essentially started. I started with drinking. It was accessible. It wasn't too, I wasn't aware of how to get any other stuff other than alcohol. So, but it wasn't until later on, about, I guess, maybe 5 years ago, that I identified as an addict, that I really, grasped that word. And I was like, oh my God, I have a problem.
I see. And so it's interesting too, because 15, high school, that's the time when you're trying to kind of figure out like who you are, where you fit in. I'm sure that it's easy to maybe play off like, oh, this isn't addiction. This is just something else, or this isn't that bad, or I'm just doing this to kind of, you know what I mean? Like it almost seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but it's easy to almost overlook that it could be addiction because you're in that certain time frame of your life of like, no, this is just, a young people doing what young people do, or this is just you kind of figuring out who you are, or do you know what I mean by that? Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's because it's what people were doing, right? It's not that bad. And it was me trying to fit in. It was me I was always awkward. I was always like anxious. I'm a highly anxious person. And with alcohol, that fixed everything. Right.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just with alcohol. How my, I guess, addiction really unfolded, it was with benzodiazepines.
Okay. Can you explain to me what that actually is?
Yeah, so benzodiazepines are an anxiety medication.
Okay.
They're labeled as, Ativan, lorazepam, anything that ends with a PAM.
Okay. And is it prescribed then?
Yeah, it's prescribed by a doctor or psychiatrist, and it's a highly addictive drug.
Did you know that when it was prescribed to you?
No, no. And it's actually like, as a professional now, the doctors don't necessarily tell you. They literally hand it out like candy,
Oh,
which
wow.
is, like, it's used for short term because it really kills your anxiety. Like, it's perfect. You take it and that anxiety is no more, right?
Definitely.
So it's a very quick acting type of medication. So if
Yeah.
you're having a very bad panic attack, you can have this and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Now,
So it does what it's supposed to do, but, and it's that but, right?
yeah, and for a lot of people, they don't have any issues with it, right? However, now it's in the psychiatric world, is being, a lot of doctors are being very cautious with it. So
Okay.
now they're only giving, like, 5 or 10 instead of a month times repeats.
Got it. Got
Um,
it.
and for myself, like, nobody told me that this would happen, but this was a magical drug for me.
Got it. Yeah.
It was,
And
I would take one and I would be like, oh my God, my anxiety is done. And then I'd be like, oh, I need another one and another one and then
mm,
another one. And I would literally have 30 a day, which
oh,
is a
wow.
whole month's worth of prescription.
Totally. And so I'm curious to know too, like prior to being prescribed this prescription, like was there anything that you were doing to try to cope, to try to like deal with your anxiety? Did your doctor talk to you about maybe trying some other methods before just having that prescription? I know, like you said, it came easily, but I'm hoping that as a medical professional, they said, oh, you know what, like let's try these other things first before we prescribe. And maybe that's what they're realizing now.
Um, it's a yes and a no. Like, I went to therapy for a very long time before kind of being prescribed this, right? So I knew my coping strategies, but at that time, like, I was highly depressed, highly suicidal. I was My way of coping was through self-harm, which
Mm,
is another form of addiction because it gives you that release.
yeah.
And it's an escape from the emotional pain that I was in. And so those were my coping strategies. And because I was being hospitalized a lot and there was a lot of attempts, and we therapy wasn't just what I needed, right? I needed more medication. It needed to be added. And with all of the medication that came with, also benzodiazepines came along.
See, I
Uh,
see.
yeah.
And during that time, like it, were you around 15, I guess, when this all kind of started? Like I imagine that it's a, you're dealing with a lot. Like you're trying to handle your own self. Now you've got like these people coming in saying this is what you need, and nobody's, I guess, protecting you. So like where's the support? I guess, what does that look like? How does
Yeah. So as I now discovered, as an addict, I am very, very good, or I was very good at hiding it.
hmm,
I was a functioning addict.
yeah,
I was
okay.
functioning till up to 4 years ago, because I'll be coming up in 4 years clean and sober. And no,
Congratulations on the 4 years.
thank you. I still have I have a month to go, but nobody knew. Nobody
Okay.
knew. Like, I kept a job. I got kicked out of college because of my addiction, but I managed to be in school and finish school.
Yeah. You
And
were
no,
successful in like not allowing anyone to see what was going on,
yeah,
which I wonder like that doesn't really play into the narrative of what we think an addict is, right? Like we don't think, oh, okay, like we see an addict and we're like, oh, you must be this person on the street, you must be homeless. But like
yeah,
what you're also saying too is like, hey, like addicts look like a spectrum, and you know, I'm curious to know, like, because you were able to mask it for so long, like, what kind of, like, how did you get to the point where you realized that you were an addict? Was it a moment of self-discovery, or was it that someone saw like some of that behavior and was like, that's not okay? Like, did it take someone stepping in, or was it really just yourself to kind of realize what was going on?
There was through the, I guess, end of my addiction, there's people that noticed a little bit that I was like off, right? Not only was I abusing alcohol,
Mhm.
and clearly I was abusing my medication, but during college I dabbled on a lot of opioids as well.
Okay.
So I dabbled in a lot of things, whichever um, is available or whatever worked faster. And um, I think people knew. I think my mom knew,
Yeah.
um, because the amount of drinking that I did at a family gathering is not normal.
Yeah, exactly. And
It's
maybe, do you think that, like, and I think about my own family, it's like you can see things, but you are not comfortable enough to kind of step in and say something. And I wonder if that speaks to like how we should be supporting people when we see maybe some of that behavior or engaging in conversation and not having that fear. Um,
yeah,
what are your
absolutely.
thoughts?
Well, it's also very cultural in a
Mhm.
way. Like for my family, mental health and addiction is not a thing. It they still have a hard time understanding. My mom understands. My mom, my brother understand my mental health piece. It's so hard to grasp that addiction,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
and I think my mom kind of just brushed it off, being like, it's a one-off, it's a one-off. There's other
Okay.
people in my life that, were being like, hey, you may have an issue, like the things that you're doing, the little, like, I was such a, and I hate using the word um, manipulative, because to me it has such a negative connotation, but it essentially is the definition of resiliency, right?
Yeah.
I'm feeling that my needs met the only way I know how. So if I need to lie, then call me resilient. But
Yes.
people think manipulative is such a nasty and very awful word, but I was very good at lying and pushing my doctors, and
Okay.
um, it's or lying to my friend
Yeah.
about different things, lying to the people that I love, different things like that. I was so good at it because I needed to get what I needed to escape
Mhm.
my own
Mhm.
emotional pain. And and you know that if you really really know me, you know that I cannot lie. I suck.
Mm.
My voice gets squeaky. I can't make
Yeah.
eye contact, but you best believe when I'm going through withdrawal or when I'm craving, I will lie to your face and everything is going to be dandy.
Did that surprise you? Like that you were able to kind of like shift almost?
I don't even recognize myself, like 4 years ago. Like I have no idea who she is. I did
Yeah.
awful things. I've hurt people that I love. I took advantage of nice people. I, you know, almost destroyed my career.
Yeah. But on to flip that around though, what it shows me is that you have this power to persevere, to be resilient, as you say, to get the things that maybe you didn't think that were previously attainable, and you can always shift that into a positive direction. So while you're recognizing that, you're unrecognizable in this state maybe 4 years ago, I think that it's also a point of like showing you your potential as well, of like you can shift that and take that energy and take those skills that you've learned there and shift it into a positive direction. I'm not sure if that's how you feel about it, but that's what I'm seeing is like, oh, okay, like so you have that in you. You have that in you to kind of like move that into a forward and positive direction.
Yeah, it took it as awful as it was, and as awful as I was. When I really got through when I began my recovery
Yeah.
process, it wasn't my choice.
Okay. What do
And
you
that
mean by
always
that?
it's always icky because I always tell people who are, talking about their addiction or whoever, I always let them know, like, that person needs to make their own decision, right? They need to hit their own rock bottom.
Yeah.
And they have to have the willingness to go to seek support. For myself, I did hit rock bottom, and I almost ended my whole career and dragged up people with me.
Yeah.
And the only option was, I get fired and reported, or I go to NA and get clean.
Okay. Okay. So you had to make a choice at that point. But I
Right?
imagine that prior to that, for maybe the people around you, maybe it's friends, maybe it's family, if they're seeing that and maybe they know that you have to hit rock bottom, that can't be easy, right? So then what does that look like, in terms of how do you support someone who's in active addiction, knowing that they have to hit rock bottom without maybe facilitating that addiction, or like, you know what I mean by that?
Like enabling it, yeah.
Enabling, thank you. That's the word.
It's hard. It's hard, and I can't imagine what it was like to watch me, because there were people that were like, "Yo, Maria, you're going crazy. You're an addict. Like, what's wrong with you?" Like, fuck you. Like,
Yeah.
who do you think I am?
Yeah.
And for myself, the way that I got through were the people in my life that didn't judge me.
Okay. Like that.
That held an open space for me to be like, I fucked up, I
Yep.
realized.
Yeah.
And then it'd be like, okay, right?
Yeah.
Or
accepting your flaws and all, right?
but it's also at the same time using a harm reduction model.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, harm reduction is literally reducing the harm of something, right? Wearing a seatbelt, harm reduction. You are still going to get injured, but you're not going to get as injured.
Okay. So how do we then take that into addiction?
So for myself, it would be counting my drinks.
Okay.
Right? Yep. And the amount of drinks that I would have, I would understand how that would metabolize within myself. So a lot of people have like a crazy Friday night, right? Yep. And then they party, they wake up with a hangover, they have to go to work, they drive to work, they're still drunk.
Yep, definitely. Definitely.
A lot of people don't know that. So knowing that is harm reduction.
So there's like an education like component to it, like having understanding.
Absolutely. Also, for example, would be if you had a family member or somebody that that was using any type of injection drugs, having clean needles.
Okay. Yeah. So then it prevents
it prevents HIV, it prevents Hep C, it prevents needles, veins from getting infected.
Totally. So what I'm understanding then is that a harm reduction model isn't necessarily saying, hey, I'm going to stop you from doing whatever it is that you're doing that's harmful to you, but how can I assist in maybe reducing the amount of harm that you could potentially cause to yourself? Do you find that like, maybe whether it's your own experience or your professional experience, like that people are receptive to a harm reduction model? If it's approached in a non-judgmental way, like I guess it's almost like, could I go up to someone and say like, hey, I know that you're in active addiction, but I'm going to approach you with a harm reduction model. Obviously, I wouldn't say it like that. That's ridiculous. Or is it better to kind of almost ebb and flow with someone to be like, hey, like, how about like making an offer or a suggestion, as opposed to saying, I'm going to do a harm reduction model, so you should only have this many. Like, nobody wants to hear like, I can't, right? It's almost like you're giving someone the option or the offer to
exactly, and not labeling, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Not like, hey, I know you may be struggling with an addiction, or hey,
yes.
you're whatever. Being like, hey, I see that you're using this substance quite a bit. Yeah. How about just call me after you're done, or hey, I know you're using this. I'm not judging you. Don't care what you do. Live your best life. Here's naloxone.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Is part of the harm reduction model to also humanize the person and not dehumanize people. Like, you know what I mean? Because like what I'm hearing in terms of like the approach too is like, you're not saying like, hey, you're an addict. Like that's, people don't necessarily need that label on them. Like they know if they are or they're not. And it's more of just saying like, hey, like you're human, and I'm going to approach you and be, I don't have the right language, I know that. But I feel like there's a part of it where it's like you could be anybody, and whether or not you're in addiction or not, I'm approaching you as like someone who's just looking out for you, you know? So I feel like maybe that harm reduction model maybe is something that we should start thinking about just using on a regular basis with everybody. Like, doesn't necessarily have to just be someone who's in addiction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really important to humanize the person. We're people. And
Yes.
because addiction and being an addict has such a negative stigma, because
Yeah.
I know when I first ever thought about addiction, it was literally a junkie under a bridge shooting up.
Exactly.
That is not me.
No,
right?
it's not.
Far from that. I am high functioning. You cannot see that. So when somebody approaches somebody that is struggling with addiction or substance misuse or anything like that, you automatically make them feel less than because they're dirty, right? Because of what's happening within your own perception of what addiction is. They're dirty. They're dirty because they're sniffing things and injecting and whatever they're doing, and society has portrayed that as dirty. The movies, things like that. You never see an addict being like, oh, I'm like living my best life. No, none of us are living their best lives.
And I think you're touching on some really good points. Like, to me, what I'm hearing is like, we're all struggling with something. Like, how about just have that basic understanding, and just because maybe you express yourself in one way or carry yourself in one way and I don't resonate with that, doesn't make it less valid or less than. Like, we really shouldn't be doing that to one another, because we're all unique in our own ways. And it also sounds like too, addiction is also a unique experience. It's not one way.
Absolutely. I've never met another person that has the same exact type of journey and addiction than I have. We may have the same drug choice, but it could be completely different in the way we use it.
Totally.
Right? And at the end of the day, we all have some sort of emotional pain, and we cope very differently. Some people eat tons of chocolate. I'm not calling you a chocoholic. The shopping and the sex and the way just we cope is very different.
Exactly.
But look at somebody that eats tons of chocolate and being like, oh, you're like lesser than me because I don't like chocolate.
Totally.
No, I'm gonna be like, hey, have you thought about, I don't know, instead of 5 bars, maybe just do like 4.5.
Exactly. Everything kind of in moderation. But it also sounds like, we're always engaging in coping mechanisms throughout our lives that just become sometimes habits, sometimes they become challenges, sometimes, like we have to kind of curb them a little bit or completely. But everybody's coping in their own way, in whatever works best for them. And then to me, it sounds like too, like for you, because it started so young, you have to learn kind of what those positive coping mechanisms are for you, what works for you personally, what works for you, Maria, as opposed to what works for me, Tracy. Like, we might have different things that work for us, and some things we gravitate to and some things like we don't. Like, chocolate is just not my thing, so I will not be using that to cope, but good on anyone else who does. And I'm not going to like stick my nose up to them. That's their choice. But like, I wonder too, just when you think back between like when you grew up to like now, having gone through kind of the struggles with addiction, how has like your sense of identity really shifted over that time? I know that there was a period of time where you didn't recognize who you were, but how is that different to who you are now? Do you notice that like there's always been this consistent thread throughout kind of your timeline?
There's a lot of self-discovery that
Mhm.
I've had, even with, my mental health journey as well. And I think at the end of the day, what I have embraced is pain.
Okay.
And I have embraced not being okay. And that is one of the biggest coping strategies that I have, because, through my journey of, addiction and self-harm and suicide attempts, I was running away from the pain. I was running away from, everything that I was struggling with, and pretending like I was fine. And at the end of the day, it's like, I'm not okay, and that's okay.
Yep.
Gotta cope differently.
Yeah.
I can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. It's a different insanity. And that's what I did for years. So today I may not know who I am fully, because we change and evolve all the time.
Definitely. And go ahead.
But I do describe my journey as a puzzle.
I love that.
I'm not broken, right?
No.
I'm a puzzle piece. And for some people, they have 4 pieces and it's super easy and they're fine. For me, I have like a bajillion pieces that have been scattered throughout everywhere. And some I'm stepping on and sitting on, and my cat's playing with them and I can't find them. But throughout my recovery journey, I've developed ways of finding them and putting the pieces together. So I know at the end of the day, a puzzle is a beautiful piece once you put it together. I just have a lot of puzzle pieces that I need to continue to find, but I'm close to it. And eventually I'll come together and be, whole, or whatever people say, whatever normal people feel like.
Nobody's normal.
No, yeah, I don't know how I'm supposed to
Nobody's normal.
I do. I have a lot of puzzle pieces to find.
Yeah. And I really love that analogy of the puzzle piece, because it's so easy to kind of picture in your mind. But the cool thing too about puzzles is that no matter how many pieces there are, even as you start kind of putting them together, like you're putting in the energy to actually put them together, you start seeing the picture, right? And you don't necessarily need to have all of the pieces in order to see who you are, which is kind of cool. But still, like, it's great to always kind of be on that journey of self-discovery. One thing I was thinking about before you had mentioned the puzzle pieces was, I wonder if some of that, like running away from the pain, like it was almost as if you were trying to mask that from yourself. So you know how you're saying, like, when you're in that active addiction, like you're really great at like not letting anyone else see that, and like giving them kind of what they needed to think, like, oh, everything is okay. But do you think that there's like this correlation between also like running away from that pain of like, okay, I'll do what I need to do in order to like not make this a thing for myself, of I don't want to deal with that, I don't want to look into that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question that I don't know the answer to.
You don't have to have the answer. That's okay. But while you're thinking about that, I also wonder too about the correlation between like your mental health and maybe some of those coping strategies and maybe some of those substance issues, and then kind of like how that manifests over time, maybe.
Yeah, so a lot of people think that mental health and addiction are completely separate. And it's not. It's actually in the DSM. So it's this big book that, diagnoses everybody with mental health issues. And addiction is part of the DSM. Okay. So it's part of that mental health continuum that is very wide and expands.
Yep.
And they're like best friends.
Okay. How so?
If one starts to act up, the other one joins somehow, right? Addiction, like I said, doesn't need to be drugs, right? It could be sex, it could be chocolate, it could be self-harm, eating disorder. So they all tie in together, and the common thread of it is pain and trauma.
Okay.
And for me, throughout the whole thing, it was the amount of trauma and emotional pain and everything that I felt. And when I feel so intensely. It's not like 0 to 10 for me. It's 0 to 1,000 in milliseconds.
Yeah. So imagine that if you're feeling that pain, it's unbearable, right? If I had to put a word to it.
It's exactly it. It's unbearable. And I needed to find the quickest thing, which is always substances.
Yeah.
And it was a Band-Aid fix. And the more I needed, the more I used, and the more and the more and the more, right? Because my life was, I am still yet to find the rainbows and sunshines.
Okay.
And I say this not because I'm like morbid. Well, I am, but I say this because my life has it's been very hard. I feel like I was born and it went downhill from there. And there was, ups and downs, but through therapy, and as much as therapy has saved my life and everything else, I continue to find more trauma that I have to repress. And those little things, and I still have like my dark days, and I still have all these things. So the day I wake up and I'm like all Gucci and ready and like living my best life, somebody help me, because that's not it. But I now know how to cope, and I know that substances is not something that's for me ever. And I know some people, some people may have a very bad relationship with alcohol and now are able to build a healthier relationship with alcohol and can have one drink. Kudos to those people. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm completely sober, like across the board.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. And that's important to know what you can and what you can't, right? But then I think it just speaks to the fact that everybody is unique in their experience and what they need and what works for them and what doesn't work for them. But knowing what you need or what you don't need is so important. But also, I would say that, what's that analogy of like, as you're peeling back onion layers or whatever, it's like you've dealt with like this outer surface, but now like you've got to deeper and deeper. And as they say, whoever they is, the universe gives you what you can handle, right? But it also gets to show you like what your growth, what your strengths are, like there are still positives that come out of that, even if we can't see them right away. And honestly, I think that I would be surprised if anybody's just seeing rainbows and sunshine on a continuous basis. Like I think for a lot of people, it's probably more rainy and cloudy days. And everyone's kind of chasing that sunshine and rainbows. But my hope is that, there are things that are in your life that kind of balance things out, because I think that you can have both. Sometimes the sky is beautiful and sunny where we are, and it is cloudy over there, and it can switch on a dime. I know that all too well. And so, I think that it's important to also recognize that multiple things can exist. So while you could be appearing, happy and gradient and great and everything is Gucci, inside it may not feel that way. And then vice versa, right? Like you may be feeling like the world is out to get you, and that you're just constantly dealing with stuff, and other people are thinking like, wow, like I wish I had what she had, right? So it's not easy. I can only imagine it's even harder if like that's like you're just adding more things that you have to deal with. But it's also like for someone on the outside, it's inspiring to see that you're handling it, and you're handling it with such grace, and yes, sometimes morbid humor, but what you're doing is it's active. You're actively handling it in the way that works best for you.
Yeah. You know what? I wouldn't change it. A lot of people ask me, it's like, oh, if you could change anything, what would you do? And I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't want to redo it.
Fair.
Like, going through withdrawal for 6 months is not my favorite.
Okay.
I don't want that. No, thank you. But I wouldn't change anything because it's made me who I am today. And today I am, you know, strong, independent woman who loves herself even when I hate myself. And that to me is like blessed, because I hated myself all of the time, but now I love myself even when I hate myself, and I know that I'm worthy of recovery.
Yes.
And that's something that I've worked so hard to fully believe, and to believe it and feel it and accept it from other people. And I know addiction is it's an awful thing, and it really does not discriminate anybody, age, race, sexual identity, religious, like nothing.
Everybody's right? Fair game.
Everybody is fair game, exactly. So I know what that's like, and I see it both ways of the addict. I see it as a professional who also has to see my clients, and in my head I'm like, oh my God, like, don't do this. I'm just like, well, that's okay. I remember when I last relapsed 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago, I had my drug of choice with me, and I got picked up from the hospital, and my friend, he knew that what I was gonna do. He knew it, and I told him, I was like, this is what I did. I have my drug of choice. And he was like, you know, calmly, didn't like stop the car and like, you know, get out. He was just like, okay, are you gonna give it to me? And I was like, no. And then he's like, okay, just call me when you're done.
So no judgment.
And I was
open.
I knew that he wasn't gonna like it. I knew that my decisions were gonna be bad. He also knew that he could not stop me, and if he did try to stop me, it could have potentially hindered our relationship.
Totally.
And he knew that for me to admit that I was going to do something took a lot of courage. So he understood that, and he honored that. He didn't push me to be like, Maria, you're going to fuck up your life again. He was just like, call me when you're done. I'll be here.
Yeah. So and that's so important to have that support around you, right?
Absolutely.
And I wonder too, like when you're meeting new people or creating new friend groups or whatever it might be, how does that like support, like that piece of support play in? Like, are there certain characteristics that you're looking for? I know like we talked about like being non-judgmental, obviously just holding space for someone, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with what they're doing. Is there anything else that that is of value when you're looking for friendships? And does it change because you know that you have an addictive personality, let's say?
Oh my God, I feel like I'm putting on an ad being like, I need friends.
Nobody's saying that.
Friends are welcome.
It's a quality over quantity, by the way. Quality over quantity. Always important. Better to have one great friend than 50 horrible ones.
It's okay. I'm high maintenance. But open-minded.
Okay.
Open-minded, non-judgmental. I also feel like I'm doing like a dating profile.
This is whatever you want it to be. This is whatever you want it.
No, I'm taken. I'm happy. This is not an ad.
Okay.
But I do need people to be non-judgmental and open-minded, given the fact that I have encountered a lot of things in my life, and I will continue to do that. And that to me is just, and holding the space, right? Holding that space for me to say the greatest thing that's anybody ever said to me. It's the same friend that I was telling you in the car. I was actually in his car when I was 15, and we were driving, and I had an awful breakup, and things like were really shitty in my life, and everybody was so tired of me hearing like me telling them my problem with this guy. And I was crying, and then he was super calm, and then he's like, Maria, whatever you tell me, I'm not going to judge you. I broke down into two, like I just
next level.
because nobody in my life had ever said that to me.
Yeah.
Everybody else had judged me. And for him to tell me, whatever you're going to say, I'm not going to judge you for it.
Yeah.
Right? I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, so not only holding space, but also letting people know what, like, that you are holding that safe space for them, right? I think it is important to not just assume, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're like, I don't know what you're thinking. I need you to just tell me. And if I haven't heard that before, then it adds even more value.
Mm-hmm.
And
as much as you know, if you have a family member or whatever that's struggling with addiction, you want to protect them, you want to fix, and you want to put them in this bubble because you see them, you know, going down this awful, like, dark path.
Yeah.
You can stop it. Right. And that's the thing. I'm like, you can't stop it. If they need to do whatever they need to do to get their fix, that's what they're gonna do.
Totally.
And for you to have this mentality of like wanting to save and protect and do this, it's going to hurt them even more, and it's going to break that relationship, because at the end of the day, eventually they're going to hit rock bottom, and they're going to need to have somebody that's still there in their life.
Totally.
And that could be you, right?
Yeah.
That's super important.
It's almost like saying, like, let's not cast aside people, but let's also make sure that how we're approaching isn't what we would do for ourselves, because we are our own selves, not like, I'm going to fix this because this is what I would do. More like, okay, I'm going to step back. And again, applying that harm reduction model of like, I see that this is harmful, but how can I reduce the harm, as opposed to just completely stop it or mitigate it?
Absolutely. And educate yourself on what harm reduction is. It's not enabling. A lot of people think it's enabling.
Okay.
You're just preventing more harm, right?
Yeah. Now, question.
Yes.
If somebody wanted to learn about harm, like, are there any resources that you recommend that someone could go to be like, okay, like, here's a really great place to go if you want to learn more about addiction and harm reduction, or anything in that matter, maybe even mental health?
Yeah. So, I mean, wherever you're listening from, so I live like in the GTA, so we have like the needle exchange program,
Okay.
and that's a harm reduction based organization that goes out there, and I used to do it harm reduction. So they go out there in the community and hand out condoms and needles and
Yep.
you know, everything that they need to make sure that they're safe. So there's like the needle exchange, and the CAMH would have resources as well.
Okay.
So it depends on the region, but
Yep.
harm reduction in its own, like, it's super easy to Google and just to actually comprehend that that practice.
Okay.
Right? And it's also because we are in the opioid crisis, and I overdosed 3 times, and those, I think twice, were I was using opioids and I was mixing it, and it's really important to have naloxone.
Okay. And where would you get it?
You can go get it in your pharmacy,
Okay.
shop for Drug Smart. You don't need to give your health card. They will ask for it. You don't need to give that to them.
Okay.
Just to keep it anonymous as well. They will also teach you how to use it.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty accessible, is what you're saying. Like, it's
not pretty accessible. A lot of them are now using the nasal instead of the injection.
Okay.
It's just easier to use. And if you have any questions, you can go to your region. And in their website, it will say how to get the naloxone kits, and it's just good to have one. It's good to give that out to the person that is using, even if they're not using opioids. The chances are that there's fentanyl in there.
Yep, that's scary too.
Fentanyl is out there, and I'm very lucky that I never came across fentanyl, but because of that, it's quite dangerous. So just being educated, educate your loved ones, carry it with you. You never know when you're going to use it, and that's pretty much something that you can do to as a harm reduction, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to judge them. Just be like, here's naloxone.
Exactly. Educate yourself, educate yourself, educate yourself, and be non-judgmental, right?
Yeah.
So for everything that you've shared today, is there anything else that you want the audience to know, that maybe they to understand? Are there any misconceptions that you want to address? Anything?
Yeah, for the people that are struggling, something that I wish I was told was that you are worthy of recovery.
Mm,
You are worthy of recovery, and this doesn't make you a bad person.
yeah.
Being an addict does not make you a bad person. Yes, you've made shitty mistakes and decisions, but it doesn't make you a bad person. And for that, you do deserve recovery.
Mm,
And for the caregiver parent who is supporting their loved ones, I know it's hard. I can understand it. I see it as a professional. And the only thing is that be compassionate and be non-judgmental and hold space for that person. You may not like what they are doing, but at the end of the day, they're going to do it anyways. But just educate yourself on harm reduction, or even educate yourself on what their drug of choice is, to see how the effects can have on that person, as well as don't push like what they should do. A lot of people would push like go to rehab. Don't do that. Give them options.
yes.
They want to have control. They need to have that control, and their life is already out of control. So keep pushing. It's not going to help anybody. So whenever you're ready, whenever they're ready, you can give them a couple of options. Hey, you can go to rehab. Hey, CAMH, CMHA, like different resources. Whenever you're ready, have your pick. I'll support you in whatever you're doing. So it's something that is really essential, and it's also for the caregiver and parent and that's supporting their loved ones. Be compassionate with yourself. You didn't do anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong, but hold space for that person. And also there's resources for you too that you can access to also understand what's happening within yourself.
I love that. Thank you. And before we go, I need to know if there's anything that's bringing you joy in your life right now.
Well, my fur babies, they always give me joy. Having conversations like this also gives me joy. It makes me feel hopeful that I'm hopefully helping somebody out there. And yeah, my friends, but right now my fur babies, because I have my cat Lucas underneath here, and he's been moving the camera slightly.
He's giving you angles.
Yes, he's giving me angles. But right now he is giving me a lot of joy because he is just allowing me to pet him.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for engaging in this conversation with me, allowing me to interview you. I hope that this conversation is ongoing and continuous. And I definitely think that you've helped someone. So you've definitely helped me learn. So check that off. Number one, helped. But definitely, I'm sure there's a viewer out there that's also been helped. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.